All right, here we go. So the start of evolution. So what scientific explanation can account for the diversity of life on Earth? Okay, I like that. So it all deals with what topic? Okay. Evolution, but we're going to talk about genetics because genetics does tie into this topic too. Okay. So up here is good old Charles Darwin. So he is considered the father of evolution. All right, so Charles Darwin is known as the father of evolution. So during his worldwide travels on the HMS Beagle, he made numerous observations and collected evidence that led him to propose a hypothesis about the way life changes over time. So much of his theory was developed from observations made on the Galapagos Islands. And here he studied finches and also tortoises. Anybody ever heard of the Galapagos Islands? Yes? I actually know somebody who was there. Yeah. So I know somebody who actually traveled there, and this is like what it actually looks like. So speaking of, so Darwin observed that the characteristics of many plants and animals varied noticeably among the different islands of the Galapagos. So he did study different tortoises, and if you can see up here, you have 3 different islands, Pinta, Hood, and Isabella, and you can see that they all look different, okay? And this is because they had to what? Adapt to the environments that they live in. So each island had different climates, and the tortoises on each island had different shaped cells, and this is why. Another thing that he studied were finches, and he studied the different sizes and shapes of their beaks. And if you look at the image up on the board, it shows you the different types of finches, and you can look and see that they all had different size and shaped beaks, some smaller, some thicker, some longer. And depending on the sizes and shapes of their beaks was what they actually ate. So some ate seeds, some ate fruit, some were insect eaters, some had eaten cacti. So here comes his book. So Darwin had published his observations and theory of evolution in a book that was called On the Origin of Species. He did this in 1859. We're going to talk about each of these ideas, okay? But there were 4 main ideas that he published that have held up and have since been strengthened by recent evidence. So the first idea is that there is variation among members of a species, okay? So we don't all look the same, and we learned this when we talked about genetics. Same, okay, we talked about us as humans, but the same goes for things like a watermelon. If you were to go to the grocery store and pick up a watermelon or from a farmer's market, does every watermelon look identical? No. Okay, same goes for a frog. A dog. Next is idea number 2. Idea number 2 is that some of this variation is heritable, which means that it can be passed on to offspring. We learned about this when we talked about genetics and also meiosis. So the evidence for this is that humans select for and breed the already present variations that they find useful. And this is known as artificial selection, okay? So you see up here, the wild mustard plant, okay? And from this, you see cauliflower, other kinds of cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, kale. Another good one is Brussels sprouts. So they all came from the same plant, but they are a different variety or variant of that one plant. Here's another example, okay? This shows dogs, and my 2 dogs are actually a great example of this, because another way that we can look at artificial selection is selective breeding. So if we are being selective, we are picking and choosing the traits that we want, okay, and then making that happen. So dogs are a great example of this. For example, my dogs, who remembers what kind of dog I have? Close. It is, but what's it called? Nope. Curly. A Labradoodle, there you go. You were close. There's one of them is. So a Labradoodle is a Labrador Retriever mixed with a poodle. So one of the reasons that they breed those specifics, or even a Golden Retriever, is because of different traits that each have. So poodles are known for being hypoallergenic and non-shedding, right? And then a Lab or a Golden Retriever are known for their big brain. So for being super smart. And poodles can also, and they're very obedient, and also super friendly. Is that what you said? No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
No. And poodles are also super smart. That's pretty cool. What's that called? The game. Oh, okay. That's pretty cool. Oh, so you might see a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about that you see in there. That's cool. But yeah, so dogs are a great example of this. So if you hear the term artificial selection, okay, selective breeding. So example, besides the dog itself, but all dog breeds come from the same gray wolf ancestor. Another example, okay, what do you see up here?
Corn, wheat.
Wheat, corn. Idea number 3, there is a struggle for existence as organisms compete over a limited amount of food, living space, and mates. So because of this, not every organism is going to survive and mate. So that takes us to what? Anybody know what that's called? No. What this would deal with, what is it called? Yeah, survival of the fittest, right? So survival of the fittest, does that mean the fittest survive?
No, most well adapted to survive.
Yep, the best well adapted to their environment are the ones that will survive and reproduce. Nicely done. Okay, so that's what takes us there. So idea 4, individuals that are better suited to their environments or that have the adaptations that enable fitness are the ones that will survive and reproduce most successfully. So that is known as survival of the fittest, which is in turn natural selection. So 2 super important vocab terms up there, adaptations and fitness. So an adaptation, what word do you hear in there? Adapt, okay? So this is any inherited trait that increases an organism's chance of survival, okay? And when we say an inherited trait, it can be anatomical or structural, which we're gonna get into those pieces when we get into evidence of evolution, okay? Or it can be behavioral. Fitness, okay? Fitness is not what we think of as fitness. It's the ability of an organism to be able to survive and reproduce in its environment. Okay, so not our idea of fitness. So what adaptations does an Arctic hare have to enable it to survive in an Arctic environment? Blends in. Thick fur. Okay, because what kind of environment is it in? Okay, super cold. So how does a change in environment affect the fitness of the hare? So when an organism's environment changes, its fitness has to change as well because it has to be able to what? Survive. So it has to then be able to adapt to that environment to be able to survive. So now we went from the Arctic to what? To what? To spring, okay? But we went to the complete opposite kind of environment. So over time, natural selection results in changes in the inherited characteristics of a population. So populations become better adapted to their surroundings. So up here, before I pull up what happens under each picture, we're going to kind of talk through it to see what we actually see. So up here, what do you see in this first image? Different colored beetles, okay? So some brown, some green, right? Now we introduced what? Okay, birds. Okay, and what do you see in that middle image? Okay, so this is our tree, right? And you still got green and brown beetles, but what color is the tree? Brown. Is brown. So there's some beetles that blend in, right? And there's some that stand out. So the birds started eating the green beetles. And then over time, what happened? Okay, so there are a lot more brown beetles than there are green because the brown ones were able to reproduce because those were the ones that survived because they were best what? Suited for their environment. Okay, so this shows us what happened. So talking scientifically, there's variation in the shell color of the beetle population. So because the brown beetles can blend into the tree bark, they escape being eaten. So they obviously have the greater fitness and will be able to reproduce more. So in the end, over time, there are more brown beetles in the populations, okay? So this takes us into actual evolution. So evolution in short is change over time. So it is change in a population over time. So with Darwin's ideas, okay, this is what was most controversial. And that is what is known as descent with modification. So each living species has descended, so coming from, with changes from other species over time. But this was a very, very controversial idea. So if we were to go back far enough in time, all living and extinct species, which we had stated earlier, okay, share one common ancestor. So let's do a little review. Some variation is considered to be what? Heritable, which means it can be passed on to offspring. Humans breeding organisms for desirable traits is called what? Artificial selection or selective breeding, okay? True or false? Every organism that is born survives because there's enough food, water, and shelter. That is very false, okay? Natural selection is also called what? Survival of the fittest. Does it mean the fittest survive? No, okay? Make sure that we understand that. The ability of an organism to survive and reproduce. Fitness. I was about to do this, but that's really not right, but you would have knew what I was talking about, right? True or false? The strongest always survive and reproduce. Very false. It's the what? The best adapted. This is a trait or characteristic that increases an organism's fitness. What do they do? Adapt. So adaptation. Over time, populations become blank to their environments. Say what? Okay. Anybody else? Better adapted, same, okay? Best suited, better adapted. And that's it. Does anybody have questions?